Hey guys, Savannah here, and I've got a quick tutorial for you about Synchro 4D scheduling software, specifically as it pertains to your scheduling course. So we're going to go ahead and get started. The first thing everybody needs to make sure they've done is downloaded the training files, which have been put up on Moodle for you, but if you are for some reason unable to access those on Moodle, you can go to Synchro software, synchroltd.com. Up at the top, go to Support and Downloads, over to Training, and this page will bring you to Download Training Materials, and you want to click on Pro Fundamentals and download those. Once you do that, go ahead and save them to your desktop. It'll be called Pro Basic Training, and in this you will see a file called Synchro Basic Training version 5.1. It's a PDF that looks just like this. This video more or less will be an audio tour through their training. So let's go ahead and open up Synchro. Just go to Start, All Programs, Mosaic, Engineering Tech, to Synchro 4D, and pick Synchro Program. Click on that and let it load up. So when you first open your Synchro software, you should get something that looks very similar to what I have here on the screen. But to make sure we're all on the same page, let's go ahead and go to the very top, Windows, and then go over to the side, this little layout, pull that down and do Reset Layout. This should reset your layout to look exactly what it looks like on my screen. So now I'm going to go through the various items that you see here on the screen. Up at the top, you have your basic ribbon. You can cycle through all of these tabs to find different options. Over on the right-hand side, you'll see what's called 3D objects. There are also tabs down at the bottom. Go ahead and click on Navigator, whichever. Over here in the middle, you should have this screen with a bunch of links on it. That's just the support tab. So if you kind of come right here in the middle, click on Gantt, that's going to pull up the Gantt chart. Obviously, there should be nothing there right now. Just below that, you have your 3D window. And over on the left-hand side, you have task properties, also with tabs on the bottom that can be cycled through. So you can customize your screen layout depending on what you prefer and what you prefer your workflow to be like. So in order to do that, let's start with the 3D window down here. You can resize this by hovering over between where the Gantt chart starts and where the 3D begins. You'll see the little arrows. You can pull that up, resize it. Too big, pull it back down. Let's say you want to pull out this 3D window, just double click on the header bar right there. You can see that it pulls out. I personally like to do this and drag this screen over onto my second monitor, just so I can have a full monitor dedicated to the 3D. However, in this example, I'm going to just keep it docked here. So if you want to put it back to where you just got it, double click on the header again, it goes right back down. Let's say you want to put it somewhere else. Let's undock it. Now, if you left click and hold up on the top, you can see that this little docking icon appears in the middle. If you hover over it, it will give you a preview of where the window that you're holding will go if you let go of the button. You can also move it over here as an example. You can move it all the way to the side screen, just like that, and you can do that with all of these windows. So if I pick up the navigator and I want it to be up there, that's where it'll go. If I pick up this, I want it to go on the bottom, that's where it will go. You can customize your layout to whatever you prefer. So let's say that I close out that window, oops, and I close out my navigator window, and now my screen is all messed up. And so if I want to retrieve a specific window, go up to the ribbon here to Windows, and I can select 3D. That's going to pull my 3D window back up in the last place that it was docked. And I can also pull my navigator back up, and it will appear in the last place it was docked as well. So this is all jacked up, and I don't really like this. So let's go back over to Windows and reset the layout so it returns back to what we had at the beginning. This is the layout that I'm going to use to conduct this tutorial, so I would recommend that you keep your layout in the same position, I suppose. That way you can just at least see what I'm clicking and where I'm clicking it at. Alright, so the first task we are going to talk about is importing a schedule into Synchro. So right here in the middle, make sure you have your Gantt chart selected, and we're going to go ahead and import a schedule. Now note that Synchro can import many types of schedules, including those from P6 and Microsoft Project, amongst many. For this training, we are going to use the training files provided, which are Microsoft Project schedules. So, go up to File, and hover over Import, and go up to Microsoft Project XML, and select. Browse to where you have saved your training files. For me, it's on the desktop. I go to my basic training, importing schedule, and then I will select the training project schedule and hit Open. I'll click Next. This basically is where you can say, do I want to import or skip importing particular things? For this, just leave it just as it is and go ahead and click Import. It's going to show a progress window. Here's what the output was. Click Finish. Boom. Now you can see you have a schedule in Synchro. On the left-hand side, you have what is called the task list, and on the right-hand side, you have the Gantt chart. So this works very similarly to Primavera, but the clicking, specifically what you click, is a little bit different. So if you hover over in the Gantt chart window and use the middle mouse wheel to zoom in and out, use the middle mouse click, so if you click and hold the middle mouse, that's how you can pan, move around in the schedule. If you want to zoom way out, do something like that. Zoom in just a little bit. And so that's just how you navigate over in the Gantt chart area. If you come over to the left-hand side, you can click individual activities, similarly to how you do in Primavera. If you click the little collapse button, it will make everything disappear. You can do the same action by right-clicking in the task window and going to collapse and collapse all. That collapses it to the very top WBS item. If you want to expand everything, similarly go to expand, expand all. Pretty straightforward. So you can also customize this window. If you hover right in the middle, you can slide this over so that you can see all of the columns on the task list. Likewise, if you want to see more of the Gantt chart, just slide that all the way over. That's how you do that. So similarly to Primavera, you can begin to customize what you see, specifically columns here. So right-click on the headers and go to Customize Columns. You get a display box very similar to that in Primavera. So let's say you want % complete to be one of your columns. Use this button to click it over. You can move it up and down for display, whichever. Then you decide you don't want it anymore. Just click back over to take it away. I'm going to go ahead and click cancel because we didn't actually change anything there. And in terms of how you view your task list, up here at the top, if you go to the task and go over to Gantt mode, you can see that currently you should be displaying by work breakdown structure because that's how the schedule is built. If you want to view it by activity code, click on activity code. Likewise, if you just want a list version, click on the list. For now, we're going to leave it in the WBS. And there's one more little thing that I want to talk about over here in the Gantt window. So you should be able to see two lines. One is going to be a blue dotted line on your screen called the data date. The data date acts very similarly to that in Primavera. But the one I want you to worry about the most right now is a red dotted line with a little arrow on the top. You might have to scroll over to be able to find it. This line is called the focus time. Now, we'll talk more about focus time later, but I want you to go ahead and take that red line and drag the focus time back to before the start of the project. And just leave it there for now. We'll talk more about it in a bit. Now we're going to talk briefly about some display options and where you access those options. So if you go up to the ribbon, to the Home tab, come right in the middle and select the options. And this is going to bring up options for everything. Specifically right now we want to go to time display format and make sure that your time display is set to the 24-hour clock. This is just following the training manual and the format that it's using. You can also click display time of day or not display time of day. For now, just leave it checked. And one other thing we want to talk about really quick is autosave. So currently I have my autosave set for 30 minutes. Your default is probably 1 minute. You might want to up that because every minute it's going to autosave, and during the autosave process you cannot actually work on your model. So I would bump it up just for now. You can change it later if you'd like. And if you want to have your autosave and backup data, go ahead and click Browse. I just made a folder right on my desktop called Synchro Backup, and that's where it's going to back up files in case Synchro crashes. Synchro will crash on you. I promise it will. Make a backup file and make sure you know where your backups are being saved. So go ahead and just click OK right there after you change those settings. And now we're going to talk about importing 3D models. So process is basically the same. Let's go up to File, Import, 3D, go to Add Files, navigate to your basic training folder, and go to Importing 3D Models. And we want to select Landscape and Site. So to select both of them, just click one, hold the Control key, select the other one, hit Open. Then we're going to go to Next. These are options that determine how your 3D model is going to import. Right now, make sure that you check the box Load 3D Objects into Memory, and make sure all these other boxes are checked with the exception of the SKP format at the bottom. That's for SketchUp files. Go ahead and click Next again. These options are if you want to move your 3D objects. Right now you don't even know what they are, so just leave everything as is and go ahead and click Import. This window should pop up, the Resource Wizard, and it will have two options, Assign to New Resource and No Assignment. So just go ahead and click Assign to a New Resource and click Next. In this window we are importing information about the site. Leave the company the same, it will automatically make a new company. And in the name, just go ahead and let's call that Site. And under the type of import, this is going to be a material. Make sure to make those selections and go ahead and click Next. Now this part is the part that you really need to pay attention to, and it's a bit confusing. I would recommend checking out page 13 on the training manual. It gives you like a visual explanation of what these options are. So when you're importing a model, you have four choices. Assign to a resource, don't build tree, add resource underneath, don't build tree, assign to this resource, build tree, and add resource underneath, build tree. These options basically determine how the model is imported and how its constituent parts are displayed. So let's say we're importing a big piece of equipment and we want that as a whole model. Well, we don't want it to display its individual parts because that's really no use to us. So more than likely, you would want to assign to a resource either the first option or the second option where it doesn't build a tree. On the contrary, if we are importing, let's say, a site model, which we are, that has pieces that we want to link to individual schedule activities, we would want it to build out a tree so that we can select each of those items individually. Check out page 13, like I said again, it really gives a better description of this, and hopefully you'll see once we start going through. So for this particular one, check the last option, Add Resources Underneath, Build Tree, and go ahead and click Finish. And you should see some 3D objects populate down in your bottom window. If for some reason you can't see objects in your 3D, over on the left hand side where your navigator is, click on the tab 3D Objects, and you should have something called Objects of Scene. Expand that, and you should see two files, Landscape and Site. Make sure the checkboxes are in fact checked. That way you can see items in your screen. So let's take a second and explore what we have over here. If you hover over this and kind of pull out just a little bit, that would help. So, as I said, you have Landscape and a Site file. Checking them will either make them disappear or make them visible. So let's just turn on the Site just for now. And go ahead and click the expand. Actually, let's right click on this and go to expand branch. That's going to bring up the entire tree of the site DWFX model. So if you pick individual items, you can start to see over in the 3D they should be highlighted. So surrounding buildings, for instance, if we select that, all of the surrounding buildings get picked. If we don't want to see surrounding buildings, simply select the box called surrounding buildings and uncheck it. And that's how you turn things on and off, etc., etc. And this can be done for any model element. Now, if we had selected do not build tree, the site would have come in only at this level, and we would only have been able to turn on and off the entire thing. But since we clicked build tree, it built out a tree of all of the individual pieces that make up the site model. So go ahead and turn landscape back on, and we are going to go ahead and bring in 2 additional models to show you an example of an error message. So go ahead and go to import 3D, add files. This time we want to add architecture and structure. Go ahead and click open, click next. Make sure load 3D objects into memory is checked, and make sure limit 3D object tree by level is set to 0. Next, and import. We're going to assign to a new resource. Click next, and we're going to call this office building, and it is also a material. And because we want the individual pieces to be displayed, we are going to add resource underneath build tree and click next. Now you should be getting a duplicate names in 3D file. What this error message is telling you is that there are multiple 3D objects with the same name. The reason that Synchro doesn't like this is because if you are in fact linking, say, subpart 2 with a discrete schedule activity, and then you go back and you modify your 3D model and you import that 3D model and attempt to sync, subpart 2 may or may not be in the original 3D model. If that's the case, then you may lose the link that you made initially. So go ahead and click finish, and then we'll see what this actually means. So you should have imported your 2 new files. So over here where our 3D objects are, let's go to architecture, expand the walls tab, basic walls, parapet walls, basic wall again. So if we look right here, we can see that underneath each one of these basic walls, they have been given 2 subparts. Obviously, subpart 1 is the same as this subpart 1 in the computer's eyes. The unique naming convention is that basic wall with this number. And so if we count the number of tree levels that we are actually at, architecture is number 1, walls is number 2, basic walls is number 3, parapet walls is number 4, basic wall, the number is number 5, subpart 1 and subpart 2 are on level 6. The unique identifiers stop at level 5, so that's what we would want our model to come in as, stopping at the unique identifier of level 5. So this is how we're going to fix it. Just hit undo, and that's going to unimport what you just did. Let's go through the process again. Add files, architecture and structure. We want to go to next, and right here where it says limit 3D object by tree levels, we want to change that to 5 because we just said that our unique identifiers stop on level 5. Hit next and hit import. Assign to a new resource, call it office building again, material, next. Add resources underneath, build tree. This time you should not receive an error message, and your 3D model should now be populated with the building and the structure. So now that we've got our 3D objects in, let's take a look at how we're going to navigate in our 3D window. I'm going to actually pull this guy up a little bit so you can see a little better. So in the 3D window, you use the middle mouse wheel to zoom in and out. You use the left click to rotate the 3D model. And if I left click here, right in the middle, it's going to rotate about that point I've clicked. If I click this building over here, it's going to rotate about that point. Similarly, if I'm zooming in and out, if I place my cursor right over that middle building and zoom in, it's going to zoom into that point. Likewise, if I pick this building way over here and zoom in, it's going to zoom into that point. You can use the middle mouse click to pan, so zoom in, pan, rotate. You can also use the view cube down here in the left-hand corner to rotate your model into isometric views. You can also use this little ring, etc., whichever you prefer to use. Now there are also some display settings we need to talk about. So if you right-click in the 3D window and go to Visual Indicators, most of you right now will have your grid on, so you should see a grid like this in the background. But if you go back to Visual Indicators, you have the option to turn that grid on and off, turn your axis indicator on and off, that's your navigation cube down in the bottom left. You can turn a legend on, which talks about appearance profiles, we'll get to that in a second. And it also shows 3D paths, which you'll get to that later. So for me personally, I like legend off, and I like the grid off it. So now that we kind of understand navigating in the 3D model, let's go ahead and zoom in, navigate around so that we are looking right here at the job trailer. So now we're going to talk about using the 3D model in conjunction with the schedule that we have up there. As you know, the basic purpose of a 4D model is to take your 1D scheduling elements and link them to 3D model elements. The end goal is to show the construction sequence, and this can basically be done by selecting an activity up in the activity lists, and then coming down to the 3D window, picking an object, whichever object you want to pick, and right-clicking and clicking Assign to Selected Tasks. Now, don't do that just yet. Just wanted to show you that's about how easy it is. There are also other things that you should consider when linking this, and that's how these objects are going to appear when you're trying to illustrate the construction sequence. And this is dictated by something called Resource Appearance Profiles. So to show you where you pull that up, go over here on the left-hand side and select Navigator down at the very bottom. And within the Navigator, select Resource Appearance Profiles. There are 4 ways that you can set objects to appear when you're illustrating the construction sequence, and they're listed here: Install, Maintain, Remove, and Temporary. Install is pretty obvious. That's if you're installing something and you want it to appear as install, then you select that. If you want to maintain something, that could say be a piece of equipment that is being utilized to install a different piece, but you're not actually installing the equipment is just being used for that purpose, so it would just be being maintained. Remove, very similar to install, except the opposite. So let's say you're excavating a bunch of dirt and you want to show that dirt being removed. Remove is the one that you want. And the last one is temporary, so that could be scaffolding that gets set up temporarily while you are installing windows or laying brick veneer or whatever it happens to be. A really good examples of how this is set up in the basic way is going to be on page 26 of the training manual. I suggest you check that out. It's going to show all of the defaults and the default ways that these 4 profiles are shown. So let's actually do an example so that I can show you what all of this means. So let's go up to our schedule, and I want you to select the field office task. And once you select the field office task, come down to your 3D and actually let's pick the job trailer. Up here at the top we have the toolbar, and this is where you pick if you want it to be install, maintain, remove, or temporary. And since we're starting construction, we want to install the job trailer. Finish to start, standard is the calendar. You have all those selected. Now in the 3D window, right click and select Assign to Selected Tasks. Your job trailer should disappear and not be visible on the screen anymore. Remember earlier when we were talking about focus time? If we look up at the Gantt chart and zoom in just a little bit, where we can still see our focus time right here on the left by the red dotted line, and we can see the activity field office. If we actually click on our focus time and move it past the activity field office, we see that the job trailer reappears in our 3D window. The focus time is basically going to show us things in terms of sequence. So if the focus time is out here way before, the only object that we have assigned to a task right now is the job trailer assigned to the field office. And the focus time is behind the field office activity. Therefore, it's not going to show because, according to the computer, it hasn't actually occurred yet. So, zoom in just a little bit further here to the field office so that you can actually see a little bit of width on the task. And move the focus time to the middle of that. And leave it there. If you look down in your 3D window, the job trailer is now shown in green. That's because the default appearance for an install activity is to turn it green while it's being installed. Once it's done being installed, if you move the focus time past, it returns to its default appearance as it was modeled. So let's suppose we actually want to add some objects to the activity field office. So in our 3D window, if we kind of scroll around, we see that we have two porta-johns right over here, but we also notice that there's no activity specifically called add porta-johns. So we could probably assume that when the field office arrives, that the porta-johns would probably also arrive with it. So let's go ahead and add these two porta-johns to the activity we have selected called field office. We'll click the two 3D objects. We'll make sure that the appearance profile is set to install. Right-click in the 3D window and assign to selected tasks. In the task list, if we scroll over, we can see that there are now 3 3D resources attached to the activity field office. We can display all of the 3D resources assigned to the field office activity by right-clicking on the activity and say, Select Assigned Resources. If we now look down in the 3D window, we can see that, oh, there's a tree in my way. We can see that the job trailer and both porta-johns have now been selected. So, if we look back over on our Gantt chart, we put our focus time in the middle of the activity field office, the two porta-johns are also shown in green, as they're being installed with the field office. So let's do another example. Let's do the concrete pad that's actually underneath. That's called the temporary hard standing in this schedule. Let's move the focus time back before that. And we'll go to the activity temporary hard standing, which is this surface right here. But instead of having it just appear as green while being installed, we want it to do a little something more. So we're going to create a custom resource appearance profile that shows this slab actually growing, as if it were being poured. So to do this, let's go over to our resource appearance profiles, select Install, right-click, and select Add. Let's call this Concrete Pour. If we select Concrete Pour, make sure the General tab is expanded, and we'll scroll down and we'll see that we have some options. You can modify the action, Install Temporary, Remove, Maintain. You want to keep that at Install. You have the Start Appearance, you have the Active Appearance, and down at the bottom you have the End Appearance. What we're concerned with here is the Active Appearance. That is, what the 3D object looks like when it's actually being installed. We can have a couple things. As you notice, the original color is set to green. That's just by default. I recommend leaving it at that. You can also alter the transparency when the activity starts, and you can alter the transparency when the activity finishes. But the thing to pay attention to is going to be this growth simulation. A growth simulation is essentially that. It's going to show the 3D object growing from the direction that you select. I'm going to click right to left. I'm not really sure which way it's going to display, but don't worry, we can modify it if it's growing in the direction that we don't like. So after selecting right to left, we're basically done with creating this custom resource appearance profile. So again, let's make sure that we have temporary hard standing activity selected. Down in the 3D window, let's click the concrete pad. And up here in the taskbar, make sure that our appearance profile is set to concrete pour. We can then right-click in the 3D window and say Assign to Selected Task. Because our focus time is before the activity temporary hardstanding, the concrete pad should disappear in the 3D window. Let's zoom in a little bit here. And slowly move the focus time over the activity temporary hardstanding. You should see something just like my screen, where the concrete pad is growing and then completed. So rather than, just like the job trailer, being a solid green during its entire installation, we have assigned a growth profile to simulate this concrete pad being poured. Now, let's say we're really particular and we don't like that it's growing front to back. We want it to be left to right. We can easily modify that by going back to our resource appearance profiles, going back down to our settings. Let's try a different growth simulation. I don't know how that got on custom, but anyways, let's do front to back instead. You can instantly see that over here in our window, the direction of the pad has changed. So we take the focus time all the way back, slowly move it across. We can see it's now growing from left to right. You can create as many custom resource profiles as you want. It all depends on how you want the construction sequence to be displayed and how detailed you want that display to be. So let's move our focus time back over here so we can see our job trailer. This is the basic 3D linking process that you would need to follow in order to assign all 3D objects to specific tasks in the schedule. The examples that we've just gone through are exactly that. They're just examples on how to link. There are actually many ways that you can go about linking 3D elements to activities in your activity list. Depending on your individual workflow, you'll probably do things a little bit differently, just depending on what you find easiest. Remember that there are many ways to select objects, so going to your 3D objects over here, you can select items through the tree. You can select items physically in the 3D window. If things are starting to get in your way, remember you can cut those things off. So for example, all of this landscape is kind of in my way, so I'm just going to cut it off. If there comes a time for me to assign those landscape items to a specific activity, I can always cut them back on by clicking the checkbox. If you're trying to isolate specific 3D objects, you can do so by cutting everything off and only displaying what it is that you want. So here, all I have is the site selected. So let's say I was aiming to get that building foundation, that's how I would get it. There actually is one last thing that I want to go through and show you. So you can go ahead and collapse that and actually leave everything else turned off. I'm going to show you really quick how to bring in a model, and we are going to use some of those other import options really quickly. So let's go ahead and go to File, Import, 3D. We're going to go to Add Files, and let's go to the Importing Equipment folder. For now, let's just pick the excavator by itself and click Open. Next, all of these are fine, and click Next again, Import. Here we're going to do Assign to a new resource. Click Next, Excavator DWF. Let's change its type to Equipment because that's what it is. And in this box, we want to assign to a resource, but don't build a tree. I don't need to see every little piece of that excavator. I just want it to be one whole thing. So make sure you click the first option and then click Finish. Your excavator is now going to appear in your 3D model, and it would seem as if it's buried. So let's talk about ways that we can quickly manipulate this and get it to where we need it to be. You can see over in our 3D objects, the excavator has come in. If we expand that, there is nothing there. It's just the excavator, which is good. So let's make sure we have the excavator selected, and in the 3D window, let's right click on it and go to Edit, and let's use the simple manipulator. You'll notice that some controls come up around the excavator. One in blue to move us backward and forward, one in green to move us left to right, and one in red to move us up and down. So let's go ahead and use that red control and pull that excavator right out of the ground. Now, you can rotate as best as you can to get a view of where those tracks actually are. Use the red arrow to manipulate it up and down. You can see we kind of went back into the concrete there. Let's move it up, move it up. In general, getting it relatively in the right location is more or less what you want. And so let's say that we want this guy to be digging somewhere else. So let's click him again, turn on our edit, simple manipulator, and let's drive him over here. Let's drive him over here and rotate him around so he's facing this way. Let's just say that's where we would want him to be. Now, if we wanted to move this piece of equipment in a more specific way, you can do that. So select the equipment, and over on the right hand side, task properties, go down to 3D properties. And you're going to have a couple options here. Specifically, we want to focus on rotate and translate. So if you have this piece of equipment selected and you want to rotate it, if we rotate about the x-axis 180 degrees, just click rotate. Well, and now it's upside down. So we probably want to rotate it again to get it right ways up. Probably want to rotate around the z-axis. There we go. Now let's say we want to move this guy to a specific spot. We can move him relative to where he is now. So let's say we wanted to move him in the x direction. I'm going to put 10,000 because it's millimeters and hit translate, and then he moves. If we want to translate him in the y direction, he moves again. Now, if you put a value into the z, obviously it's going to move him up and down. We just got him right, so let's leave him there. You can also use the absolute function. If you know the exact x, y, z coordinates where you want this 3D model to live, then you can select absolute, type in those values here, and click translate, and it will move that object to those specific coordinates. You shouldn't need to do that, so don't worry about it now. So with that, you more or less have the basics of what you need to know in order to create your first 4D schedule. On Moodle, you can find the link to the Synchro YouTube page, where it has individual tutorials on other items. Use those if you need, dig around if you need some more information, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to let myself or Dr. Hildreth know. Thanks.